welcome to yet another episode of Creative Connects Behind the Art, a series of heart-to-heart conversations we've had with African artists on their creative journeys. Today we're joined by Anuarite Gikonyo, who had a rather early inclination to the arts. Growing up in Nairobi, Anuarite recalls taking center stage at family functions to perform some original songs that should make in the moment. Ever since, art has formed a more integral part of Anuarite's life. Not only has it strengthened her relationship with herself, but it has also inspired her mental well-being. Art has also seen Anuarite pursue her passion for African storytelling. In fact, she just recently completed her first short story titled A Letter to a God. Stay tuned for our interview with her. Hi Anu, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Tola?
Amazing. So apart from your name, who can you describe Anuarite as?
I think that one thing I can't separate myself from ever is my art journey. And so I'm an art enthusiast at heart. I identify as queer. I'm a lover of language with very big hopes for the role that art plays on the African continent.
You speak so much of your creative journey and you attribute much of who you are to it. Where did it really begin for you?
So I've always loved art in one way or another. So when I was really young, I'd be that annoying child that goes up to the stage at family gatherings and sings for hours with making up songs on the spot. So I've always loved the stage, always loved audience, always loved performing. But when my journey really began was in high school, when I switched from the local system to the British system and entered my first fine arts class. And I was like, what's this? This is something you can do? Mm-hmm. So I then started painting seriously, soon entered drama class and was like, what? This is insane. I was shocked by how much of myself I was able to find in my classrooms, because I always thought the art stuff you leave on the side, the classroom is for academics, until I came to the classroom and I was being told, bring your creative mind. And I was like, okay, bet, here you go. So from there, it just became really trying to understand what creativity could mean for me. And then that's where I found my love for fine arts, writing, and photography.
What prompted you to put emphasis on writing?
So when I decided to put my emphasis on writing was around, it was last year or something, around December, and I wrote my first piece that was an observation of the world around me. And it felt so natural to me, and I decided this is what I want to do with my life. I want to be able to use writing as a way of, telling stories, and telling stories is something that I think is so important. And so writing is the medium I found myself being able to do that best. It's where I felt like I was being my most authentic self and giving the most that I could.
Something I particularly enjoyed when I was going through your website is I noticed that you kind of use different mediums at the same time where possible. So even if it's writing, the captions that you write in themselves are so poetic and are so deep. You don't have to write like a full thing, but just the things that you kind of accompanied with the visuals for your website. I saw that seems to be something that you like to do. Was that a conscious decision, or it's something that just happened naturally?
Yeah, so building on that, with every other form that I'd take, writing would squeeze itself back into the picture in one way or another. So even in, like, as you mentioned with photography, I'd find myself still using words as a way to express what I was trying to capture using the camera. And so it was quite deliberate, but it's also just that so many of these art forms are so beautiful when they're interrelated. And so I love how, for example, dance and theater look together. I love how photography and writing look together, how fine art and performance look together. And they really there's so much beautiful communication that can come out of relating different art forms. And it just happened to be that writing was the one that I'd always end up engaging in whatever art form I was exploring.
Something I noticed was that vulnerability was a central theme to your work. I'm sure among many other things. Why is vulnerability important to you?
So vulnerability is something that I think is very important to the human experience. And so there's so many things that make us very different, but one thing that ties us all together constantly is our ability to be vulnerable, or our ability to reground in the ways in which we are trying to connect with ourselves. And so I think that in the whole spirit of liberation and liberating minds and liberating thought, something that has to be there is vulnerability. I don't think that liberation of any person is possible without vulnerability. And because I care so deeply about the liberation of African thought, especially, my hope is to do that through expressing vulnerability, by embodying vulnerability as an individual and inspiring others to do the same.
What would your advice be to someone who's on that journey of trying to kind of fuse themselves and their identity with their work?
Yeah, I went through the same thing. Mine was very heavily influenced by the whole westernization of Kenya. And so I'd constantly find myself trying to, like when trying to get in touch with myself using metaphors, for example, that weren't at all related to my context, or trying to tell stories that I didn't feel captured me as authentically as they could have. And so one advice that I'd give is being in touch with yourself and being more aware of yourself and your surroundings. And so allowing yourself to sit down and say, okay, what's the experience of the people around me? What is my experience? What makes it unique? What about it can I express? How do I want to express it? I think that if we had more people looking inward and looking around them, then we'd have a very authentic expression of various African experiences, not just one. So yeah.
I like that you talked about various African experiences and not just one. I think that's something that we all need to learn to be more open towards doing. And I'm sure you get to do a lot of that on your platform, Watajua. Do you want to maybe explain where the concept for Watajua began?
Sure. So Watajua is an organization that aims at using storytelling, specifically through fashion, as a means of building community and liberating African thought. So using storytelling as a means of connecting different people and educating people on various ways that people on the African continent are living.
Mm. And what prompted the idea of Watajua? What made you start it?
Yeah, so I never actually thought I'd end up working in fashion until both I remember it was in entrepreneurial leadership, which is a course at African Leadership Academy, and my friend and I were like, okay, we're trying to find a way to combine two of our passions, our love for art and our love for human rights. And so where is the parallel between these two, before realizing the ways in which storytelling can be very political. And so we found that a way of telling stories, by telling stories, we'd be participating in a larger mission to get social justice. And so by telling the stories that many people are repressing, governments are repressing, telling the stories that are harder to hear, we would be participating in a larger mission for social justice. And so that's what prompted Watajua. It's still what drives Watajua. So A Letter to a Koth was inspired by my experience at an all-girls school in Kenya. And in very many ways, this school enforced the repression of my sexuality. And so there are very many ways in which expression of sexuality, attraction, sexual orientation were dictated, and there wasn't much space for negotiation, not much space for awareness or curiosity. And so A Letter to a Koth ended up being my means of deliberately challenging these systems that I had been brought up to not want to or not be able to. And it was just, yeah, a means of speaking of my sexual speaking to my sexuality through the protagonist, Nyambura, and speaking on this taboo topic.
Interesting. Can we now have a look at the A Letter to a Koth reading?
You may. Okay. A Letter to a Koth by Anuarite Gikonyo. A Koth, one born at a time of rain. The clouds had been lamenting for hours now, sharing their songs of sorrow with the earth beneath. Lunch was especially horrendous. Beans, weevils, rice, weevils, but oh, how we loved the rain. How small we'd feel. This would be the 6th consecutive day of downpour, and local gossip asserted it was El Nino. Akoth and I, however, couldn't be less concerned with whether these assertions were true or not. While the rain lasted, we would meet here, by the steps outside the chapel, away from our routine friendships and academic demand. The conversation must have been about school, or religion, no, poetry was it? Whatever, it was something. Probably another one of the things we had tuned to match each other and wrung out desperately to keep us talking. But that day, it could barely matter, for she, Akoth, was something else. Her eyes journeyed with the raindrops from their birth in the skies to their demise at our feet, as if each one whispered final confessions only she had the penance for. The edges of her lips curled as they usually would when she was at peace, content. That day, she was a particular kind of beautiful. She was poetry, all the poetry I needed. I watched the skin of her neck peer out of her unhemmed collar, sailed down the horizon of her left shoulder, bicep, forearm. Her arm was extended, palm raised, fingers loose. The raindrops only momentarily settled on her hand, in its creases before politely trickling off, proceeding with their voyage. She didn't mind. She soon shifted her gaze to me. I had been silent, a different kind of silent. I believe she had noticed me, noticing her. She didn't mind. The edges of her lips were still curled, inviting mine to form similarly. They did. There was not much to say now. In my 3 years of failed conquest for her attention, I had used my lot of letters, my metaphors, taashira zangu, thimoshi yakwa, yet in this mutual breath, words could not suffice. I was itching to share the warmth of my forearms with her waist, the throbbing of my heart with her chest. I must admit, I did not think to scan for priests or prefects or passers-by. No, they could barely matter. My mind, a selfish thing, needed her in my arms, right there. Do I go on? Or
Unfortunately, we're out of time. We love to see it though. I'm so happy that I got the opportunity to listen to all of it yesterday. I'm so excited for you to send it off into the world and to see how people are going to react to it.
Thank you so much, Toela. I was really glad you could make it.
So much for having me. I guess this comes to the conclusion of our interview. Do you have any advice for African artists, whether that's painters or writers or photographers? What would your advice be to them?
All I'd say is we need so many more of you. I don't think the world can ever have too many artists. We need so many more people thinking for themselves and putting their experience to words and sharing the experiences of others. So please, if you even remotely are interested in an art, explore it.